Pushpin disclaimer: this story is a work of dramatic narration inspired by real-life emotions and situations. Any resemblance to actual people, places, or events is purely coincidental. The purpose of this content is entertainment and storytelling only. It does not promote or encourage infidelity, betrayal, or immoral behavior in any way. The narrative is intended to explore human emotions, relationships, and the complexities of love. Viewer discretion is advised. On the surface, everything in my life looked perfect. I was married to Daniel, a man who was stable, reliable, and kind in his own quiet way. We had been together for 6 years, and in those years we built what many would call a comfortable life. Our house sat in the suburbs, painted a warm shade of cream with a front porch that caught the morning sun. Inside, laughter often filled the walls, especially on weekends when family and friends gathered. From the outside looking in, I was the picture of a woman who had everything she could possibly want. Among those who frequently crossed the threshold of our home was Eric, Daniel's longtime friend. Eric had been in Daniel's life long before I ever came along. They grew up together, shared teenage adventures, and supported each other through the turbulent years of early adulthood. Naturally, when Daniel and I got married, Eric became part of my world too. At first, he was just my husband's friend, someone I saw during barbecues, football nights, and holiday parties. He was easygoing, funny, and carried an energy that seemed to brighten any room. I never really thought too deeply about him. To me, he was simply a part of the background, a friend who belonged more to my husband's life than mine. But as time went by, Eric found ways to weave himself into our everyday moments. He would drop by unannounced, offering to help with fixing a squeaky door or carrying groceries when Daniel wasn't home. He always had a casual smile, and his presence became something I grew accustomed to, almost without noticing. Still, nothing about those interactions seemed inappropriate. If anything, I was grateful. Daniel worked long hours, and sometimes I found myself lonely in the silence of the house. Having Eric around, even briefly, added a sense of liveliness to otherwise dull days. Of course, I never said this aloud. Not to Daniel, not even to myself. It felt harmless, a simple extension of the bond my husband already shared with him. Life went on this way, predictable, steady, almost scripted. We had our routines. Breakfast at 7, workdays that stretched into the evening, and occasional dinners out to break the monotony. On weekends, Daniel loved watching sports with Eric while I cooked in the kitchen, their laughter spilling down the hallway. Sometimes I would peek into the living room and see them sitting shoulder to shoulder, beer in hand, arguing about whose team would win. In those moments, I felt a quiet sense of security. Daniel had his best friend, and I had the comfort of knowing he was never alone. I never suspected that beneath the ordinary rhythm of life, something unexpected was waiting. At that point, Eric was just Eric, Daniel's friend, my occasional companion in casual conversation, and nothing more. I couldn't have imagined how one stormy night would transform everything, shattering the neat little picture I thought was unshakable. It's strange how life works. You can spend years believing you know your boundaries, your limits, your heart. And then, in a single night, one moment can tilt your entire world off balance. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if there were signs I ignored, tiny hints hidden in the ordinary. But at the time, I was blind to all of it. I thought my life was simple, steady, and unbreakable. I had no idea how wrong I was. It was a Friday evening in late September when the storm rolled in. The sky had turned an ominous shade of gray by late afternoon, and the weather forecast warned of heavy rain, thunder, and possible flooding in the suburbs. I had just returned from work, my hair damp with drizzle, when the first rumbles of thunder echoed across the sky. Daniel had texted earlier that his office meeting would run late, so I prepared myself for another long evening alone. I set about cooking dinner, chicken soup, something warm and comforting to match the weather. The rhythmic patter of rain against the windows grew louder, turning into a constant roar. The house felt larger than usual, the empty living room echoing with the occasional crack of thunder. I pulled a sweater around me and tried to focus on chopping vegetables, pretending the storm didn't make me uneasy. Just as I was stirring the pot on the stove, the doorbell rang. The sound startled me, sharp and unexpected in the middle of the storm. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure of who could possibly be out there in such terrible weather. Slowly, I walked to the door and pulled it open. There stood Eric, soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to him, water dripping from his hair onto his face. His usually easy smile was replaced with a sheepish grin. "Sorry to drop by like this," he said, shivering slightly. "My car broke down a few blocks away. I didn't know where else to go, and with the rain, I thought I'd just walk here." Relief washed over me. It was just Eric. Familiar, harmless Eric. "Come in quickly, you'll catch a cold," I said, stepping aside to let him in. The warmth of the house enveloped him as he shook off his wet jacket. I fetched a towel and handed it to him. He murmured his thanks, rubbing the fabric through his damp hair, his shoulders rising and falling with the effort. There was something about seeing him in that vulnerable state, drenched, shivering, out of his usual confident composure, that tugged at me. "I'll put your jacket by the heater," I said, trying to keep things casual. "Dinner's almost ready, you're welcome to stay." Eric nodded gratefully. "I don't want to impose." "You're not," I interrupted, perhaps too quickly. "You'd be doing me a favor. It's too quiet in here alone with the storm." As he settled into the kitchen chair, I couldn't help but notice how the flickering light from the stove softened his face. His usual carefree demeanor was replaced with a quietness I rarely saw in him. It was as though the storm outside had stripped away the humor and replaced it with something more real, more human. We talked as I finished cooking, light, casual conversation at first. He told me about his car troubles, how the engine sputtered out just as the rain started pouring. I laughed, joking that his luck was as bad as the weather. He smiled, but there was a lingering seriousness in his eyes that I didn't fully understand. When the soup was ready, I served us both and we sat across from each other at the dining table. The storm raged outside, thunder shaking the windows, but inside, there was a strange calm. The sound of spoons clinking against bowls became the background to a conversation that grew more personal than it should have. We spoke about work, about Daniel, about life. At one point, I admitted that Daniel's long hours often left me feeling lonely. Eric listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine, and for the first time, I noticed the weight in his gaze. It wasn't the gaze of a casual friend. It was something deeper, though I couldn't name it yet. The clock ticked on, the rain poured harder, and the night stretched longer. Little did I know, that storm wasn't just outside. It was beginning inside me, quietly, dangerously, with every word and every glance shared across that dinner table. After dinner, the storm showed no signs of calming. The rain hammered the roof like thousands of impatient fingers, while lightning illuminated the living room in brief flashes of white. Eric and I moved from the dining table to the sofa, carrying cups of steaming tea. At first, it felt harmless, friendly, two people keeping each other company during a storm. But as the minutes passed, something began to shift. The conversation started with safe topics. Eric told me about his childhood, how he grew up in a small town where storms like this would knock out the power for days. He smiled as he described building blanket forts with his siblings and playing card games by candlelight. I laughed, feeling a warmth in his stories that I hadn't felt in my own home for quite some time. When I shared my own memories, my laughter carried a hint of sadness. "Daniel and I used to have nights like that, back when we first got married," I said, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall. "We'd cook together, play board games, but life got busy, and I guess we forgot how to enjoy those little things." Eric's gaze lingered on me. "It sounds like you missed that," he said gently. I nodded, biting my lip. "I do. Sometimes I wonder if I'm asking for too much, just wanting to feel seen again." The words slipped out before I could stop them. My heart raced as silence followed. I didn't usually admit things like that, not even to myself. Eric leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his voice softer now. "You're not asking for too much," he said firmly. "You deserve to be appreciated. Anyone would be lucky to come home to you every night." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. His words weren't just kind, they were dangerous. They carried an intimacy that crossed the invisible boundary between us. I looked away quickly, pretending to sip my tea, but the weight of his statement hung in the air. The silence stretched, filled only by the storm outside. I could feel his eyes on me, searching, waiting. Part of me wanted to change the subject, to pull back into safe territory. Another part of me, lonely, fragile, hungry for connection, wanted to stay right there, teetering on the edge of something forbidden. I finally broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "You really know how to make a girl blush," I said, my tone light but my heart pounding. Eric smiled, but it wasn't his usual playful grin. It was softer, more deliberate. "I wasn't trying to make you blush. I was just telling the truth." My cheeks grew hot. I couldn't decide if it was the tea, the storm, or his words. All I knew was that the room suddenly felt smaller, the distance between us shrinking with every unspoken thought. We continued talking, but the tone had changed. The jokes were fewer, the pauses longer, and the looks we exchanged lingered just a bit too long. I noticed the way his hand rested on the sofa cushion, inches from mine. I noticed how his voice lowered when he said my name, and I noticed the way my own body reacted. Tense, restless, aware of every detail in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. At one point, lightning lit up the room, and instinctively, I flinched. Without thinking, Eric reached over and touched my hand, just briefly. It was a simple gesture, meant to comfort, but the electricity in that touch was stronger than any storm outside. I pulled my hand back quickly, my pulse racing, and he didn't push. But the damage was done, the boundary had cracked, and both of us knew it. By the time the clock struck 11, the storm still showed no signs of letting up. Eric leaned back, sighing. "Looks like I'll be stuck here for a while." I nodded, my throat dry. "Yeah, looks like it." We didn't say more, but the silence between us was louder than words. That night, something unspoken had shifted, something that could never be undone. The storm raged on outside, but the real storm was inside me. After Eric's words, after that fleeting touch of his hand on mine, I could no longer ignore what was happening. Something had shifted between us, subtle, invisible, yet undeniable. I felt like I was standing on a fragile bridge suspended over a deep ravine. One wrong step and everything I valued, my marriage, my family, my sense of self, could come crashing down. As I cleaned up the teacups and straightened the living room, I tried to distract myself with small tasks, but every movement carried the echo of his gaze. I could feel his presence behind me, the quiet weight of him sitting on the sofa, watching me, though he said nothing. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. In my head, I argued with myself. This is wrong. He's your husband's friend. Stop entertaining these thoughts. But then another voice whispered, "When was the last time Daniel looked at you like that? When was the last time anyone made you feel like you mattered?" I hated that the second voice was louder. When I finally sat back down, I kept my distance, placing a pillow between us as if it could shield me from temptation. "You must be tired," I said, forcing a smile. "The guest room is ready if you'd like to rest." Eric hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "I will," he said slowly. "But can I be honest about something first?" My stomach tightened. "Sure," I whispered, bracing myself. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low. "I don't want to make things uncomfortable. I know you're married, and I respect Daniel. But tonight, when we talked, when I heard you laugh, when I saw you really smile, I felt something, and I think you did too." His words hung between us, raw and unpolished, like a confession he couldn't hold back any longer. My throat tightened. He was right, but hearing it aloud made it real, dangerous. I shook my head, though my heart betrayed me by beating faster. "Eric, you can't say things like that. It's not fair. To me, to Daniel." My voice cracked at his name. "I know," he said quickly, his hands gripping together nervously. "I don't want to complicate your life, but I also don't want to lie. You deserve someone who sees you, who values you. I just—" He stopped himself, exhaling hard. Forget I said anything, but I couldn't forget. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling while the rain pounded the windows. My husband's side of the bed was empty, as it often was when he stayed late at work. The silence made me ache, and in that emptiness, Eric's words echoed louder. I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to calm the frantic beat of my heart. I told myself that this was nothing more than a fleeting moment, a storm-fueled fantasy that would fade by morning. And yet, deep down, I knew it was more. Something had awakened in me, a longing I couldn't silence, a spark I couldn't smother. The guilt settled heavy in my chest, but so did the desire. I was torn in two, between loyalty to my marriage and the temptation of being seen, wanted, alive again. It was a battle no one else could see, but it raged inside me with every breath I took. When I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought haunted me. If one storm could bring us this close to crossing the line, what would happen the next time? The storm outside had grown violent, like a mirror of the chaos within me. Thunder cracked across the sky, shaking the walls, while heavy rain pounded against the windows. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself to sleep. But sleep was impossible. My body was restless, my mind replaying every moment. His touch, his words, his eyes that lingered just a little too long. I tossed and turned, frustrated with myself. Why can't I just stop thinking about him? I thought. I reached for the empty side of the bed, where Daniel should have been. The sheets were cold, untouched. It wasn't just tonight. It had been like this for months, even years. He was either at work or out with friends, and when he was home, he was distant. I had grown used to the silence, but now, with Eric in the next room, the silence was unbearable. Another crash of thunder echoed through the house, followed by a loud bang. My heart leapt. For a moment, I thought it was just the storm, but then I realized it was the back door, swinging open from the force of the wind. I grabbed my robe and rushed downstairs. The kitchen was cold and damp from the rain blowing in. I struggled with the door, trying to push it shut against the storm. That's when I felt it. Strong hands covering mine, steadying me. I turned startled, and there he was, Eric. His hair was messy, his shirt clinging slightly from the humidity, his eyes fixed on mine. "I heard the noise," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "I thought something happened." We pushed the door closed together, the sound of the storm muffled once it latched. But the real storm wasn't outside anymore. It was here, in the narrow kitchen, in the heat between us. We stood so close that I could feel the warmth of his breath against my skin. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. It was as if the whole world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. I swallowed hard, stepping back slightly, trying to create space. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice shaky. But he didn't step back. Instead, his hand brushed against mine again, this time not by accident. My pulse quickened. He looked at me with an intensity that stripped away all my defenses. "I can't keep pretending," he said softly. "Not after tonight." I should have stopped him. I should have walked away. But I didn't. Couldn't. My heart was pounding too fast, my body betraying every promise I had made to myself. The thunder roared again, and in that flash of chaos, his lips were on mine. It was sudden, desperate, and filled with all the unspoken emotions we had been holding back. My knees weakened, my hands clutching at his shirt, torn between pushing him away and pulling him closer. When we finally broke apart, breathless, the weight of what we had done crashed over me. "We can't," I whispered, though my lips still trembled from the kiss. "This isn't right." His forehead rested against mine, his voice low and urgent. "I know, but tell me you didn't feel it too." I closed my eyes, my chest heaving. Couldn't lie. I had felt it. Every part of me had felt it, and that terrified me more than anything. We stood there in silence, our hearts racing, as the storm continued its furious song outside. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and though guilt burned in my chest, so did a dangerous, intoxicating desire. That night, in the eye of the storm, I realized the truth. Nothing would ever be the same again. White heavy check mark section 5 complete. Approximate 520 words. Kia my section 6. The consequences, secrets, guilt, and temptation likna shuru karun? You said. Next ChatGPT said. Perfect thumbs up of my APCO section 6 data, hoon. 500 plus words. Paragraph style, emotions or guilt/suspense kusath. The morning after felt heavy, as though the air itself carried the weight of my guilt. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange silence, but inside me, the turmoil hadn't eased. I moved through the kitchen preparing coffee, my hands trembling slightly with every motion. When Eric entered the room, his presence felt like both comfort and danger. He looked at me differently now, not as his friend's wife, not as someone forbidden, but as someone he had crossed a line with. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, everything we had done last night returned to me. My heart raced, my skin tingled, and at the same time, shame burned deep inside me. I quickly turned away, stirring the coffee as if it could distract me from reality. Daniel came home later that morning, cheerful and oblivious. He kissed me lightly on the cheek, asked about the storm, then laughed when Eric joked about how we had to wrestle with the back door. I forced myself to smile, my face stiff, while inside I was screaming. Daniel's trust was absolute, his faith in me unshaken, and that only made the guilt sharper, like a knife twisting in my chest. As days passed, I tried to bury what had happened. I convinced myself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness brought on by loneliness and the storm. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't just the storm. It was something deeper, something I couldn't deny anymore. The way Eric's hand lingered when he passed me a glass, the way his eyes followed me when he thought no one noticed. These were not accidents. And worse, my body responded to them every time. One afternoon, Daniel was called away on a business trip for 3 days. The moment he left, my world grew quieter and far more dangerous. I tried to distract myself with chores, with reading, with anything that would keep me from thinking about Eric. But when I went to the backyard to bring in the laundry, I saw him there, fixing the fence damaged by the storm. His shirt clung to his body from the heat, sweat glistening down his arms. I froze, my pulse quickening. He looked up, our eyes locking, and in that unspoken moment, I felt my resolve crumbling. He set down the hammer and walked toward me, slowly, as though he already knew what I was thinking. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm but gentle. I shook my head, panicked. "No, Eric, we can't keep doing this. Daniel trusts us both. He trusts you." He stopped just a few feet away, his gaze steady, unwavering. "I know, but do you trust yourself?" The question pierced through me like lightning. Did I? Every instinct screamed that I was playing with fire, yet some part of me, some hidden, aching part, wanted that fire to consume me. That night, I lay awake again, Daniel miles away, while Eric's presence just across the hallway burned in my thoughts. The house was quiet, but inside me, the storm had never truly ended. I had opened a door that could never be closed, and the temptation of stepping through it completely was growing harder to resist. I was trapped between two worlds, loyalty and desire, safety and danger, truth and betrayal. And with each passing day, the line between them blurred, until I could no longer tell which side I belonged to. The truth has a strange way of surfacing, no matter how deeply we try to bury it. For days I lived with the unbearable weight of silence, carrying my guilt like an invisible wound. Every smile I offered Daniel felt like a lie, every embrace a betrayal. And Eric, he had grown distant, cautious, as though he too sensed that our secret could not remain hidden forever. It happened on a Sunday evening, the kind of evening that should have been peaceful. Daniel had returned from his short trip, eager to spend time together. He suggested dinner with Eric, claiming it had been too long since the three of us had sat together. My heart sank, but I agreed, fearing my refusal would only raise suspicion. At the table, conversation flowed easily, at least for them. I struggled to keep my composure, laughing at jokes that felt hollow, nodding at stories I barely heard. My eyes wandered between the two men, one who trusted me with his life, the other who held a dangerous piece of my heart. Then it happened, so suddenly I could barely breathe. Daniel excused himself to answer a phone call, leaving Eric and me alone at the table. The silence between us was deafening. His hand shifted slightly on the table, brushing against mine for the briefest second. It was instinct, not intention, but it was enough. When Daniel returned, his eyes caught the tiny gesture I hadn't pulled away from quickly enough. His voice, when he spoke, was different, heavy, measured. "What's going on between you two?" The words froze me in place. My throat closed up, my chest tight. Eric looked down, his jaw clenched, but he said nothing. His silence was louder than any admission. I tried to deny it. I shook my head, words tumbling out desperately. "Nothing, Daniel. You're imagining things." But Daniel's gaze was sharp, wounded. "Don't lie to me. I've known you both for years. I saw it just now. The look, the hesitation. Tell me the truth." And in that moment I broke. Tears spilled from my eyes, my body trembling. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I whispered, my voice shaking. "That night of the storm, I was lonely, vulnerable. It was a mistake, Daniel. I swear." Daniel's face went pale, his hand tightening into a fist on the table. Eric finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "It wasn't just her fault. I should never have crossed that line. I betrayed you too." The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor with a sound that echoed like thunder in my chest. His eyes were filled with fury and heartbreak. "Both of you, under my roof, behind my back. You destroyed everything." I reached for him, but he stepped away, his voice breaking. "I trusted you with my life. And you, Eric, you were like a brother. How could you?" The weight of his words crushed me. I wanted to explain, to beg, to undo the past, but it was too late. The truth was out, raw and merciless. In the span of moments, trust was shattered, love was poisoned, and the bonds that once tied us together had been ripped apart. As Daniel walked away, slamming the door behind him, I felt the walls of my world collapse. The one man I had vowed to love and honor now looked at me as if I were a stranger, and the friend who once brought laughter into our home had now brought only ruin. The night that had once changed everything had finally caught up with me. And this time, there was no storm outside. Only the storm I had unleashed inside my marriage, inside my heart, inside my very soul. The days that followed were a blur of silence and sleepless nights. Daniel moved out of the house almost immediately, leaving behind a heavy emptiness that echoed in every corner. His absence was unbearable. Every chair, every photo frame, every folded shirt in the closet reminded me of the man I had lost. I replayed that stormy night over and over in my head, asking myself why I hadn't resisted, why I had allowed loneliness to swallow me whole. But regrets do not rewrite the past. Eric disappeared as well. He packed his things quietly, not daring to face me after Daniel's fury. The man who had once shared laughter and easy conversations now carried the look of someone drowning in shame. I never saw him again after that night. His silence was perhaps his only way of apologizing. A coward's way, maybe, but I no longer had the strength to demand more. I was left with nothing but fragments. A broken marriage, a wounded heart, and a reputation that might never recover if word spread beyond our walls. Some nights, I would sit by the window and listen to the rain, my body trembling with memories. What once felt like passion now tasted like poison. What once seemed like a fleeting comfort had become a permanent scar. Daniel didn't answer my calls or my messages. Through mutual friends, I learned that he was staying with his sister in another city, rebuilding his life away from the shadows of betrayal. It hurt to know he was finding peace while I was drowning in guilt, but part of me knew he deserved it. He had been nothing but loyal, and I had repaid him with dishonesty. Weeks turned into months. I tried to carry on, but there is no easy way to patch up a soul torn by regret. Simple routines became reminders of what I had lost. Cooking his favorite meal with no one to eat it, folding laundry with no shirts that smelled like him. sleeping on one side of the bed that always felt too cold. Slowly, I began to realize that this story was not only about love and betrayal, it was about choices. A single choice made in weakness can change the course of everything. That night of rain and thunder had tempted me with comfort, but the price of that comfort was far greater than I could ever imagine. And yet, life has a strange way of teaching lessons. Through the pain, I discovered truths about myself, my vulnerability, my flaws, and the dangerous power of desire left unchecked. I understood that love is not just about warmth during lonely nights. It is about loyalty, sacrifice, and the courage to endure even when storms rage inside and out. I don't know if Daniel will ever forgive me. Perhaps he will move on, find someone who truly deserves his trust, his steady heart. As for me, I carry the burden of my mistake every day. It is a weight I may never put down, but it is also a lesson etched into my very being. Temptation passes, but betrayal lingers forever. Now, when the rain falls, I no longer see it as romantic or comforting. Instead, I see it as a reminder that one night, just one night, can change everything. A reminder that love, once broken, may never return. And so, my story ends not with a happy reunion, but with silence, with regret, and with the haunting memory of a choice that destroyed the life I once had. 47.